Julie Kay, who covers a myriad of things in terms of government, whether it's at the state, federal, or local level. Last night, I know we had a marathon county commissioners meeting, which you were present at, and I know it's not easy. There were plentiful sound bites for you to have to rifle through, and a lot of information that really went through last night. A big discussion was about the PAVE Act, right? And inside of that, which is a law already signed by Governor Josh Stein, gives way to put this referendum for the 1 cent sales tax on the November ballot, which was passed last night. Julie, let's just start there.
Yeah, we'll start with the biggest news. That is that will be on your ballot if you're in Mecklenburg County this November. So we've been talking about this for a while. This was the final step to put it in front of the voters, but not without 3 hours of public comment prior. That's what made that meeting so long. It was one of many things on the agenda, took up the most of it. I think upwards of 60 people signed up to speak. A lot of them in support of putting this up to voters. And again, this doesn't approve it. This just gives voters the chance to decide this for themselves. But quite a few people speaking, I would say the majority of speakers for it, although that does not mean that those that were against it didn't make some points that really stuck out to commissioners. At the end of that discussion, about 10:30 p.m., we're waiting to go on for our 11 p.m. show, and we're listening to each commissioner go down the row one by one, saying why they will or won't vote for it. Yeah. A lot of them, even though a lot of them voted for it, of course, mentioned some of those points that people against it made, said, hey, I understand what you're saying, but it's kind of now or never with this situation. Only one commissioner ended up voting against it. That was Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, and she said at one point that she was going to vote for this and then changed her mind after speaking with constituents, which I think is really interesting.
Okay, so let's kind of dig through some of the numbers, and I do want to talk about some of the people who did speak against it, because they had some really outstanding things and some really thoughtful things to say. There was one man who was talking about the cold, wet feet people who had been in the rain all day, had to wait for transit, and really did not believe that this is going to do anything for certain parts like Steel Creek, Sugar Creek, those corridors. And it seems like, digging through some of the data from WFAE, if I might, this sales tax increase 1 cent, it's going to be now 8.25%. So they were estimating that the average household is going to pay $240 a year. A low-income household is going to pay roughly $130 a year. That's according to the city's statistics. Now, that's another burden for folks to add on, and that's what a lot of those individuals were discussing. And really in another situation that I'm thinking of, there were a number of individuals who were blind who came to the mic, 4 or 5, and eloquently spoke about their journeys to try and get transit. Anything that kind of stuck out to you in some of those arguments as to why this micro transit shouldn't necessarily be on the ballot, and why it's not going to do much in those people's eyes for the city of Charlotte?
I think what's really interesting is that this isn't such a partisan issue in a way that most things are. We had some really prominent Democrats speaking against this last night. Former Mayor Jennifer Roberts, former Councilman Braxton Winston, people who have been very outspoken supporters of public transit in theory that say this is not cutting it. Yeah. Reasons why, you mentioned the cold, wet feet. Who is this actually benefiting? Right. Because across the board, it will impact anyone who spends money in Charlotte or in Mecklenburg County at any point. But who's really reaping the best benefits of this? That's why we saw for so long such pushback from Matthews. But now that silver line is kind of out of the picture in terms of a light rail, and we've kind of moved on to look at other impacts of this, we're looking at people who rely on public transit, not just people who will benefit from it. So that's students, the elderly, people who may have disabilities and they cannot drive, and people who cannot afford a car. And so we're thinking this is going to impact everyone economically, but are the benefits going to be dispersed in the way that is equitable? And that's what Jennifer Roberts and Braxton Winston were really getting at the core. Now, there have been some edits over the last couple of weeks trying to appease people who, made those points that many commissioners and council people see as very valid. Yeah. So for example, we're going to have that transit authority. It's going to be 27 people, has to be created by January 1st, so we've got a really short timeline here to appoint those people. But they did make an edit to that, so one person from the city and one person from the county level will have to be someone who uses public transit. Now, that sounds like an improvement. I talked to Action NC, and they said that's part of what we were asking for. But if you read the fine print, it doesn't have to be someone who relies on it, just someone who uses it. So, for example, it could be someone, who makes good money and lives out in the Lake Norman area who decides to take the light rail into work. It's not someone who necessarily needs public transit. Another thing, if you look at it, it says if they don't have someone qualified apply, they can kind of forego that requirement. So it doesn't add as much requirement level that they were hoping for. And so some small changes have been made, but overall last night, it doesn't sound like it was enough for people to be happy across the board.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out about the responsibility that's going to be shifting from the transit system from the city of Charlotte to a new authority, which is the Transit Authority. Other cities have this, so just kind of maybe specifying things and fine-tuning things in that regard. But this tax, as you know, is going to raise $25 billion over the next 30 years. 40% going to be dedicated to roads, 40% going to be dedicated to that rail transit, and 20% will be spent on the bus system and this new on-demand microtransit, which I think a lot of folks are looking forward to. That's the microtransit. That's the tagline that those individuals were speaking on that were blind last night. That would really help them get across the city, and it's great to hear from folks like that, because not only does it give you a different perspective, but it lets you understand what other people have to do in their journey across the city of Charlotte. So Atlanta was thrown out everywhere last night because
yes,
right, like when you go there, it's going to be heavily traffic ridden. And in a lot of places in Charlotte, it's not as bad as Atlanta. Let me just not be dramatic.
Also not as big as Atlanta.
No, but I mean, I live in Fort Mill, and it can take anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes on any day. I mean, today, 30 minutes. I was stuck on 77 for quite some time.
Yep.
And it wasn't even raining heavily. I mean, especially when there are dramatic weather events too. I mean, it is gridlocked. And then think about, we're heading into, the heart of hurricane season. We've got football games coming up. So this is just going to be an interesting setup for the next couple of decades for Charlotte to not only thrive, but hopefully to expand, because I think that they see the growth is coming, and that's really needed. So sorry to wax poetic there a little bit, but it will be interesting to see. There wasn't much discussed in the Silver Line. Now, you kind of talked about that a little bit. Update that situation, because yes, and I have a friend who's actually going to be moving to Matthews who is stoked about that, because he loves and has Hornets tickets, season tickets, and so he's going to be riding that at some point when it gets finished.
I know there's. Thinks.
I'm sorry?
I said that's what he thinks.
In theory.
You're talking about when it gets finished?
Yeah.
Well, they're not going to.
It'll be 30 years.
Wrong. To 30 years, right?
Yeah, this is a very long-term plan, and that's also something that was discussed last night, that this isn't a 5-year plan. We're looking at 2035, 2045. With these plans, if you're going to do something this extensive, do need to be made early, and that's why they were kind of ragging on Atlanta, who had a choice to make a similar plan many decades ago and didn't, and now that's the position they're in now. And that's why everyone was kind of saying, we're all for the idea of expanding our public transit. We need to, but is this the best way to do it? And you mentioned the Silver Line. There are still, within that transit authority, decisions that can be made about what that bus route looks like. Where is it going to stop? Where is it going to go? We have not heard the end of the Silver Line.
Right.
I will say, Matthews Mayor John Higdon, when we talked to him when he filed for re-election, he said, I've kind of led this charge. We are the only municipality that has really fought back so strongly against this. This is not what I'm focusing my re-election on, because the decision's already been somewhat made. But he really wanted the light rail, of course, which, I mean, he made the comparison to, you look at South End, how much that's grown since having access to a light rail. It's not going to be the same to have a bus system. So I don't think we've heard the end of that by any means, but I do think that is no longer his focus.
Well, it has to be said, I think it's very interesting that the people that were for, a lot of them who spoke last night, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, you were there, but it seemed from what we looked into, the people that were for putting this on the ballot seemed to be in positions of not necessarily prominence, but obviously they were making their claim known about how that would benefit. The mayor of Cornelius was there, as you pointed out. Ed Driggs was there. There were a couple other city council members who have a stake in this. Obviously, they live here. But it was very interesting to me to hear the people that were against this were everyday citizens that actually use this. And I'm not saying those individuals don't use it, but these people are primarily using transit every single day. And they were saying maybe those type of individuals should be part of this transit authority, right? So
Yeah.
those folks. So again, it's just some very interesting comments being made. And I was in Cincinnati before this. They have a streetcar that goes really nowhere besides the central business district, and they did not plan for that to happen, but funding ran out. It got super expensive, and so the same thing has not happened in Charlotte. But I think that they were a little bit worried about that, and then obviously. The culture, nobody really spoke about this, Julie, but a lot of people love to drive in Charlotte, and that's a culture that I'm wondering if they can shift or start to change a mindset, right? We live in Fort Mill. I'd love to leave the car at home if possible, maybe do a rideshare type of thing, but for some people, it's just not convenient. So, as you said, there are going to be lumps to come from this, but they're going to have to smooth them out at some point.
I think I'm glad you brought that up too, of the driving culture. I mean, I live in NODA, so I have kind of the example of I do have access to the Blue Line. I use it actively, but where I live, there's not necessarily a super walkable grocery store,
right?
And that doesn't necessarily change by the fact that there's a train for me to use. So it's more convenient for everyone in my vicinity, which is all. I mean, there's a gazillion apartments right there, a lot of them new, for people to drive. So that's another thing too. This is going to interact with our kind of like long-term community area planning vision for Charlotte that we've talked about quite a few times.
Right.
So we've got multiple big plans going on here at the same time.
Yeah.
Anytime you mentioned Cincinnati, my family lives in Cincinnati, so I know about the streetcar that goes to nowhere.
Yep.
Anytime you have a big plan like this, almost always it costs more than you think it's going to.
Yeah, true.
And that's something that Jennifer Roberts touched on last night. This is an especially difficult year when we're seeing all these cuts.
Yeah.
More people are looking for funding sources. Regular people are losing their jobs or are strapped for cash right now. So it's not necessarily the world's best time to be spending a lot of money.
Well, and let's not forget, there's still a discussion about 77 being widened south of Charlotte, which has to happen. I mean, as you know, and I've talked about before a couple of minutes ago, sitting on 77, any day you sit in traffic. I mean, on a Saturday and Sunday, it's just crazy. I've never been in a city where that happens other than this area. So I know it happens in Chicago and other places, but yeah, just interesting how you can always count on, traffic on certain roads. So we'll see if congestion helps it. And again, there are so many people coming to Charlotte, and the studies are out there, right? 100 plus people a day. So this is really going to be a critical time for the city of Charlotte to really get this right. And for folks, who live in other places too, because Gastonia, Mooresville, Cornelius, even South Marvin, Waxhaw, those places are really growing. Weddington. So people have to get around Charlotte in a convenient amount of time. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and something that we'll be looking into, I think, over the next couple of weeks. I'll touch on this on my stories at 4 and 5. What happens if it doesn't pass? We've already purchased the tracks.
That's right.
So we've already made strides towards doing this. We're kind of committed to it financially already. So what happens now? The mayor has previously told our Ben Thompson, we'll put it on the ballot next year, but then that means most likely going through the General Assembly again, and the process starts over.
Right.
And so that's
a great question. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about what if.
Urgency of that's why it feels now.
Yeah.
Or never,
well, and it felt so for people in positions. In different positions around Charlotte. I won't say positions of power, but, holding high offices. And again, interesting that residents who ride this every single day had some very interesting issues and problems with it that they could see coming to fruition. So we'll just see. All right, hold out hope. And like I said, it is a critical time right now for Charlotte to get this right. So there's a lot of pressure, a lot of eyes on the leaders in Charlotte right now to get this right. So Julie, thanks.
Everybody get registered to vote.
Yeah, that too. And let's not forget, it was a 6-hour meeting. Anything else that I'm missing that was on the docket that you thought jumped out at you that maybe we should discuss as well?
We could sit here for the full 6 hours, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I think that's what I'll leave you with for now.
Okay.
And I will say, speaking of getting registered to vote, turnout. This is an off year for elections. This isn't necessarily a state election, so but it's still important. Every city council seat is up for re-election. The mayor of Charlotte's up for re-election, and so still a very important time to vote.
Yeah, great point. And you want to check your registration as well, because in North Carolina there's been some issues and discrepancies with the federal government. So don't forget that as well. All right, Julie, I'll let you do your work. We appreciate you whenever you come on and putting things in layman's terms for the political dummy over here. I'll just speak for myself.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you. All right, we are going to